And we are now recording. So, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Shannon McFadden. Few housekeeping items. Cameras are optional. Engagement is encouraged. Um, and just have fun. Ask questions. Give feedback. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you don't like. Let me know what you do like. If you have an anecdotal story or an example, by all means, engage with us. Talk about it. Um, I am a former special education teacher, so that is why I'm very big on that back and forth communication. We don't know how much a person has actually picked up and learned unless we have those conversations. So I'm really big on that. Currently, I am a director of behavioral health programs for a nonprofit, and I'm still at work, but I'm technically off, so that's great. And like I said, I am the owner of the Jerome McFadden Educational Center. I did not go into this during my CJJ conference because I wanted to keep the tears back. But the center is named after my father, who was really big on education. He was a Vietnam War vet. He passed away in 2018. And one of his biggest things was education. He was huge on education. He did not have a formal secondary education. My mother did. Um, so that was one of his things with my sister and I. And let me just tell you, the man was driven to make sure that we had a lot of degrees, and we do. Way too many letters behind the name, but it's fine. Um, he retired from Montgomery County Department of Corrections, and one of his biggest things was making sure that the inmates felt seen, felt heard, felt noticed, and were given the opportunities after incarceration to actually be better fathers to their children, be better men in their communities. And as a result, this was born to basically carry out my father's wishes, his dreams, etc. So that is a little bit about me. Does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. Cool. All right, next, learning objectives. So today, when you leave here, the hope, the prayer is that you'll be able to define an intellectual developmental disability. This
I would guess that an IDD is um, a disability that impairs how people kind of move in the world or and impacts how they learn. Doesn't impair how they learn, but it requires more intensive attention, more patience, more time to understand the disability. Been doing my research a little bit.
Yes, I have. I was a disability studies minor in college, but I will say that the minor I don't think did as great of a job as I wish it would. So I'm still very excited to learn more, but it is for sure on my radar.
Good. So one of the things that with IDD, it gets, especially in the school system, it gets kind of lumped in with other health and fitness. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Murdoch. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, actually, that's what I was going to say. I think in time, I suspect I'm probably considerably older than some of you, and I think it's the name has just changed. It was not intellectual development disability at some point, but I suspect it is the same thing that we refer to as intellectual differences. I think it's anything that falls within a continuum of I don't know what we used to call the IQ spectrum or space.
Yeah, it used to be called mental retardation back in the day. It is now IDD. And you are absolutely correct. It is a spectrum of things, but not really. And we're going to get into that as well, because it is not neurodivergency. It is not autism. It is not ASD. It is not Asperger's. It's something different. And in the school system, which is probably why, Savannah, like, you learned about it, but not really, is because it's all lumped into the disability. And this is one of those disabilities that people kind of don't want to talk about. It's not a fashionable disability. It's not autism. It's not being neurodivergent. It's not being hearing impaired or vision impaired. It is literally something where the bulk of the people that have this disability do not have the cognitive awareness to be able to advocate for themselves. So unless we advocate for them, it's not going to happen. All right. So and I keep getting this acronym wrong because it's a very long one, but I'm actually a member of this organization, the AAIDD. I think it's the American Association of Intellectual Developmental Disabilities. And the American Psychological Association. They state that an intellectual developmental disability is one that is characterized by mild to profound limitations in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. So those things that we take for granted, like learning how to tie our shoes, learning how to eat, learning how to use the bathroom, learning how to cross the street, learning how to manage our emotions. And for my wonderful people in Delaware, I'm sure that you get a lot of assault cases where people wind up in jail for assault. And if I cannot manage my emotions because I literally do not have the adaptive skill set to be able to do so, how does that reflect when it comes to the law? How does that look? So even where I work, we have people here who were court ordered because of assault, sexual assault, murder, those types of things. But because they have IDD, they are now with us. And they're out in the community, they're living their best life. It's a wonderful thing. But unless you have those people that are advocating for the testing, advocating for correct services, they just wind up in general population. So again, it is impacted by conceptual, social, and practical domains. So how many people have taken an IQ test or a standardized test in school? How was your experience with it? Savannah's shaking her head like, nope. Like, nope, I didn't like it. What didn't you like about it?
I just feel like standardized testing isn't an accurate reflection of my knowledge, or I'm sure a lot of people feel that way as well. I think it's also an incredibly stressful environment. So to put a student in a situation where they have limited access to bathroom breaks, water, food, and they have to be filling in these little bubbles, it's just like, who is going to do well on those? I never, things like taking the SAT and ACT, those things were not, I was not a fan. And when I got my scores back, I was like, well, I don't think this reflects how smart I am, but okay, I guess I'll send that to colleges. But yeah, that was just my experience.
Who just came in? Autumn, go ahead.
Yeah, I think also to add on to Savannah's point, other factors to consider are test anxiety. So people that know what they're talking about, but just can't really have this too much pressure on them to do so well on the test, or they just don't do well. In addition to the environment they're in that impacts that. And also the cultural factors. So creating tests that don't consider all the variations that, all the different experiences that other people go through, and have just one answer in mind as being the right answer, where there's other things to consider on top of that.
When I taught special education, and I'm sure Ms. Murdoch, you can attest to this, I'm being a former educator, where we had to do the assessments, like I had to do the Woodcock-Johnson, I had to do, when I worked at another DDA provider, I had to do the Vineland, all of these things to see where a person's level was, right? And in that, I noticed, and if you have not read the bell curve, it's a thick book, like it's super thick. And I see Barbie nodding her head because she knows this book. If you have not read the bell curve, please treat yourself. It is a very good book. It's thick, like it's thick, but it's a good read, and it will really help you understand standardized testing, not just from the personal aspect, but how it creates just the different biases that we see. And when I did the Woodcock-Johnson to determine a person's needs in special education, I had students who would identify a hammer. They knew what it was. And when I say, well, what do you use the hammer for? They said to bang in the screw. Because in their household, you hit, it's a screw or nails, whatever. But I knew that it's to hit a nail. And you use a screwdriver to screw in a screw, and it depends on what type of head the screw has. If you use a Phillips, if you use a flathead, all of those things. But if you're not exposed to that, then how would you know how to select it on the test, right? So in order to assess IDD, they have started, thankfully, getting away from the standardized IQ test, because historically that's what they used. You had to take an IQ test. If your IQ was below 70, then you were deemed to have an IDD. Now, to Savannah and Autumn's point, and I'm going to ask feedback for this, how would that be impacted culturally if maybe 20 years ago and back, IDD was identified based on IQ? Anybody? Ms. Murdoch, you have an answer?
Would you repeat the question? How would it reflect? Is that what you said?
How would it reflect culturally if 20 years ago and back, IDD was solely based on IQ, which we know is more about exposure than actual knowledge? Well, intellectual capacity.
Mm-hmm.
How would it impact? I mean, how would it look culturally?
It would probably be skewed.
Oh, definitely. For years, low-income people were highly diagnosed with IDD. And that was at a time where people were institutionalized versus community-based care. I think Maryland just shut down their last state hospital for that particular population in like 2001. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Murdoch.
No, I was just saying, are you referring to Crownsville?
What is the one that's on, oh my gosh.
That's all right.
Because I drive past it in Owings Mills and it's like completely shut down. I think it might be Crownsville is in Annapolis.
No, it's outside of Annapolis.
Yeah, this one is in Owings Mills and it's completely decimated. But Crownsville is still there. Spring Grove is still there. But they don't use it for that population anymore, which they did for years. But that IQ test was very, very important. Age of onset is very, very important. If you are diagnosed before the age of 22, it used to be before the age of 18, before we understood brain development. When we realized that the brain does not fully develop until mid-20s. Now it's the age of 22. In addition to that, they now have created other tests, other assessments that instead of just focus on the standardized IQ, it looks at the complete adaptive skills. What is the person's skill set in conceptual domain, in the social domain, the practical domain? And they must be below 2 standard deviations of the mean in order to qualify, which is why I said know the bell curve, especially if you are advocating for people who are incarcerated that may have an IDD that was undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, because it often gets misdiagnosed in Black boys as ADHD, when in actuality, it's actually an IDD. So really keep that in mind. And with the DAB, it's called DABs. That is for use of ages 4 to 21. After 22, it is very difficult to get someone diagnosed. Extremely difficult because of the age of onset. So it's very important that, especially if we're doing preventative measures and really addressing SDOH out in the community, that we get kids the proper testing and proper diagnoses, and not just the standardized test. Like Savannah said, like Autumn said, it can create test anxiety. It can create an environment. If I'm already hungry, I don't want to take this test. I don't care about a nail. I don't care about a screw. I don't care about a hammer. I don't care about anything. I just want to get this done and over with and go eat. And really think about that stuff, okay? All right. So adaptive skills. What are adaptive skills? The AAIDD states that adaptive skills are a collection of conceptual, social, and practical things that we learn in order to function in our everyday lives. Like, how do we navigate? How do I know to get in my car, drive to work, to park, to make sure that I cross the street correctly, to be able to read things, collect that information, process it so I can be able to then regurgitate it to other people? How does that stuff work? So the first thing is conceptual domain. That's those things like reading, writing, telling time, how we process information, how we use expressive and receptive language. Social domain, how we relate to others. How do we connect to other people? And then practical, how do we operate within the world that we live in? Are we able to do little things like go to the market and budget our money? Are we able to get a job and hold it down and keep it? Bless you, Barbie. Are we able to do those things and maintain a level of functioning that does not require an enormous amount of support? Because let's just face it, my mother still helps me out sometimes. Because sometimes I need it. Sometimes I need advice. Sometimes I need a little bit of cash. I need a break. I need my mommy to just hold my hand. We're not talking about that level of support. We're talking about a level of support that if I do not have this, I cannot maintain shelter. I cannot maintain food. I cannot maintain transportation. All right, could someone give me an example? And I'm going to ask the new people. We have some new people that came in. We have Caleb and Ariel. Did I say it right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Ms. Ariel, can you please give us just an idea of what you think something that would be in a conceptual domain would be? And welcome to the group.
Thanks. Sorry, so you said I'm still trying to, you kind of moved a little bit fast for me, to be
Oh, I'm
honest.
so sorry. Do you need me to repeat anything?
Kind of the last,
Okay.
we're going over the last three. Can you go
Okay.
back to-
Not a problem. So we're looking at the conceptual domain, which is anything about how our brain processes information.
Okay.
Expressive and receptive language, how, reading, anything that's abstract.
Okay.
Right.
So in conceptual, I'm thinking as far as being able to I work in schools, so I'm going to go off that. Maybe a student is given a piece of paper or a story and then asked to read that out loud and then followed up with, what is this story telling you? What is it saying? And maybe has a difficult time explaining what they just read or understanding, or maybe even being told, given directions verbally Maybe I'm in a classroom and I'm like, hey, I want you to grab that piece of paper. I want you to go grab a pen. I want you to take it over here. I want you to take it to the back seat and write me 3 paragraphs on how you feel about X, Y, and Z. And that student might have a difficult time processing exactly what I'm asking them to do.
And that would definitely be considered something conceptual. Being able to understand abstract concepts. So being able to read the story, take the piece of paper, go to the class, go into the back of the classroom, sit down, write out their thoughts about it, learning what an onomatopoeia is, learning about how to make inferences. All of those things are conceptual skills that people with IDD somewhat do not have. If we look at it from a range, so you have mild to profound. When you look at it on the mild level, there really aren't any noticeable differences, right? Until you get older, until that person becomes about 13 or 14, then you'll notice that they don't really have a good understanding of money. Their short-term memory is a little off. So how many times have those of us that worked in the classroom, have we talked to a kid and we're like, if I repeat myself one more time, it's going to be an issue. Sometimes I think my daughter has an IDD, but she's just 13. So we also have to understand the difference between.
That's what I was going to say. How can you tell the difference between an IDD? Because that's like an entire class. Every day and even halfway through the day, you'll have everything on the board and they're still asking you,
yes,
what are we doing?
Yes.
Like, so how do you describe, like, how do you tell the difference if a student with short-term memory or even counting money, a lot of them don't know how to do that. That's not something that's taught necessarily.
And
so,
and I'm going to get into that in a little bit later because we're going to talk about cultural and social economic status and cultural differences and how that impacts diagnosis as well, because that's a very good point. You have to understand that just like with mental illness, you have to understand the difference between depression and a 14-year-old who's about to get her period. Because if y'all can't tell, my child is going to go to high school. It's a lot. It's a lot. Autumn, go ahead.
I just lost my question. When it comes to, I'm trying to remember it. I'm so sorry. I'm going to remember it and then I'm going to raise my hand again.
Okay. All right. So the next one is moderate. Academic concepts such as identifying shapes, letters, develop slowly. Language also develops slowly. So those are those kids that you're like, they should be saying this at this age, but they're really not. Go ahead, Autumn. You remembered your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I was curious if you noticed any increased rates of diagnoses in IDD after COVID, or if that hasn't been, the data hasn't been released for that.
So one of the, I don't want to get on a political soapbox on a recorded training, but one of the issues is that IDD is one of those ignored diagnoses. So I have not seen any data. I've seen data on autism. I've seen data on speech and language, and Barbie's not her because we talk about those things all the time. Everyone now is neurodivergent. Everyone now is autistic. But as far as IDD, or I've seen upticks in ADHD diagnoses, but I have not in IDD. But that is something that I feel like I should research. So thank you for that, because I would be interested to see that. I would be interested to see that. The next one, severe. There's limited understanding of age-appropriate concepts, and this is across the lifespan. And with profound, these are those people that require lifelong direct care. Go ahead, Barbie. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So one of the things, so 2 questions, twofold, and some information is also full disclosure, my neurodivergent brain is going crazy right now. So, but is it common for there to be the co-occurrence of neurodivergency and IDD? And that might be why the IDD sometimes is overlooked, because people are more in tune with what the neurodivergency is. And then secondly, background information. So our team is with restorative services, it's that fine line between behavior, intervention, accountability, right? And so one of the things that we as a team try to be very aware of is we don't get these children for very long. So seeing some of this stuff that's more like over a long period of time and things like that, we get them for very short periods of time. But one of the things that we very much try to do is to differentiate between what is actually an IDD or a neurodivergency behavior versus just something we need to hold them accountable so that we're getting them those resources. And so any information you have that can help us with that aspect of even just like a lot of times, especially Caleb and Ariel are both in schools working with middle school ages. Autumn and Savannah work more so with a few middle schoolers, but more so high school age. And then Savannah and I both also work with adults, is just being aware of like, when should we be saying to people, you need to have another evaluation or a further evaluation, or like our interventions aren't going to be enough because there are other underlying issues that need to be addressed.
Okay. I will definitely, that is later on in the training,
Correct.
but I'll definitely get it to you. And I think I talked about this in the CJJ training. I don't know, but if you notice, I have all these bracelets and I sit and I play with them because I have anxiety disorder. I got it after my father passed away and my stepdad passed away, and I had to do CPR on him. And unbeknownst to me, that's a traumatic event, apparently. Everyone's nodding their head like, yes. I'm like, no wonder. So I completely understand. So if you see me with my bracelet, but to answer your question, there is overlap with neurodivergency and IDD. But because IDD is more, not IDD, autism and neurodivergency have more advocates because the impact on IQ is different.
Okay.
It's seen more. So and with IDD, your IQ has to be below 70 in order to qualify. So if my IQ is below 70 and I'm having these issues with concepts and all these other things, it's going to be hard for me to really advocate for myself in a real meaningful way when someone who's diagnosed with autism has a PhD.
So that
they can-
IQ test is really the differentiating piece that like, if I have a child who I'm like, maybe there's something more going on, then having their IQ tested would be the best. And then finding an IQ test that's not biased in the majority of ways that testing can be.
Yep. And then the DABs that, and I'll actually have more information on that too, the DABs, because that really focuses on the adaptive skills. It focuses on the conceptual domain. It focuses on the social domain, which is where a lot of people see that overlap because of communication. But unlike with autism, where it is more so, and this is just my take on it, more so the ability to communicate effectively. With IDD, it is less about the ability to effectively communicate and the ability to actually communicate, if that makes sense.
Yep.
That's where you'll see a lot of your nonverbal kids, and still with the limited and low IQ. With autism, you can have, and this is just in my personal professional experience, you can have someone who is nonverbal, but they still have a high IQ, but no one knows they have a high IQ because they're nonverbal. And if you just give them tools to be verbal, you'll see how intelligent they really are. And that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. My partner works in behavior, so that's where I think most of my knowledge about IDD and the co-occurring comes from his experience with his clients. So yeah,
it's a lot of co-occurring disorders within IDD. Even with the population I work with, we have those with IDD and schizoaffective disorder, IDD, bipolar 2 disorder, IDD, and. But what time is it? Oh, it's 2:09. Okay. So again, I like to talk. I love conversation. So social domain, mild, communication is limited, immature to compare to same age peers. It may look like expressive language delays or receptive language delays. Moderate, communication is still immature. but there is limited understanding of social nuances. So if I'm talking to a client and I sit there like this, they're not going to understand that either I'm tired or bored. They're just going to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, because they don't really have a grasp on social cues, social nuances. There's a limited understanding of risk and what danger looks like. For severe, language is only used to build relationships, like saying hi so I can get something. I know that if I give Autumn a hug, she's going to care for me because she's my mother, not because I really care about Autumn. It's more like, this is what I have to do to get what I need. You may use sign language or a assistive technology device. If in the profound area, there's limited emotion. And again, this is where that overlap comes from. Is limited emotion, is limited language acquisition, it is limited anything. They basically don't care about the environment and what you have going on. Like, you could be there or you could be a plant, who cares? We have a set of brothers who are on the profound end. They should be either 62 and 65 or 63 and 66. And when I go visit their site, I speak, I say hello, I try to shake hands. They just look at me like, all right, well, you're not the lady with the food, so, and you're not my normal person, so you can leave. But so that's for the social domain. And again, that's where that overlap comes from. The practical domain, this is your ADLs, your ability to brush your teeth, wash your face, understanding that you need to go to the dentist, understanding that you need to transfer from the bed to the floor and how your body aligns in order to make that happen. Your instrumental ADLs, your meal prep, how you clean your home, medications. And this is another area that could be overlap. My executive functioning when it comes to my organization is crap. If y'all saw my office right now, y'all saw my bedroom right now. It is crazy, but the rest of my house looks great. I can always have company. But for them, it is very hard to organize. It's very hard to make sure they eat properly, those types of things. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With the practical skills, I had a student who had such traumatic life experiences that she exhibited a lot of the, can you go back to that slide? Sorry. The mild to sometimes even moderate, right? So she had like a difficult time. I don't know. This is what was hard. What was it attributed to? Was it the intense trauma or was it something else? And again, like to Barbie's point, I mean, I only have been working with her for about 6 months, but like toilet brushing her teeth was like we were showing her how to brush her teeth at school. We were showing her how to like wash her body. And then later learned that she had been like just had some intense sexual trauma happen. So I guess this is difficult because like which one is it? Like, is it attributed to that or is it?
No, I get your frustration because unfortunately, even with trauma and depression, it can show up in your ADLs. So what is the difference between a severe mental illness and a trauma response and this person actually needing that? And that comes down to the adaptive skills. So several domains, they have to be within below 2 standard deviations of everything, as well as the IQ test. As long as their IQ is above 70, they do not qualify for an IDD. But with children, especially, how old is the young lady?
12.
Oh, wow. Especially with the 12-year-old, you have the onset of puberty. So those emotions and hormones are all over the place. Then you have the trauma, and intense sexual trauma is very, very difficult. So there are services and supports for that. However, if she's not properly diagnosed with not just post-traumatic stress disorder, but trauma can lead to severe mental illnesses. So what is it? And unfortunately, there is that overlap. But when we get to that slide, we'll talk about it in a little more detail, okay?
Okay. In a situation like that, can I just ask, would you recommend that student get tested for both things? Like that, like that as a you know, a restorative specialist, that I'd say, hey, why don't we throw in this test as well, just to see?
I would ask what her functioning level was prior to the abuse.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So how do all these things show up? Learning and memory, self-regulation of behavior, adaptive skills, academic achievement, motivation. There's a sense of learned helplessness. There's a sense of, I can't do it, so you have to do it for me. And then they lack the ability and drive to want to do things on their own, because people, and I see this in a lot of Black families, and I love us as a people for real. Like, I love us, but we anticipate too much, and we coddle our children with these disabilities too much, and then they are unable to actually learn, because they can learn how to take care of themselves if given the correct support and physical development. All right. This goes back to some of the things we talked about culturally with exposure. There are social cultural factors that lead to causes that can cause IDD. I've had students that were in my classroom that, had they been exposed earlier to reading, to proper nutrition, to being outside and off of the phone and off of the tablet, they would not need special education, and they were diagnosed with IDD. Why? Because the people that were caring for them also had a mild IDD. So everything was familial. What we find is that IDD is typically has a higher prevalence in low socioeconomic status families than it does in higher economic status families. Why? Because of the exposure. If I am a person who literally is working 3 jobs to make ends meet, and the only thing I can do is stick my child in front of a television for 8 hours while I take a nap, the only stimulation my child is getting is that television. And how much stimulation is that really? So we have those social cultural factors. We have the biomedical factors. So what are those? Those would be Fragile X syndrome, Down syndrome, anything where the genes get a little, I don't know the technical term, but anything that impacts the genes and the genetic code that could influence and cause IDD. We have the metabolic disorders, PKE, which is something that I just learned about, which was interesting, is when babies are not able to metabolize and left untreated, it can cause IDD. We know that what we take into our body, how our bodies metabolize things, how we eat, all of that stuff also impacts brain development, especially as from birth to 6 years. Behavioral factors, those are the things where a parent decides they want to drink while pregnant. That leads to fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome impacts that, and you see a lot of people with FAS who also have IDD because it's an overlap. While the child is in vitro and that cerebral cortex and the nervous system is developing and that alcohol gets into the baby's bloodstream, it causes a lot of brain development issues, which can also lead to IDD. If mothers or fathers do not get themselves treated and tested for HIV, that can be passed to the child, which can also lead to IDD. But the biggest thing with the social cultural factors, which we've talked about throughout, is exposure, exposure, exposure. So how does that look when we're looking at, and I'm going to tie it into my Delaware people, How does that look when we're looking at prison stats? We're looking at the incarceration rates of how many people have learning disabilities in prison, how many people have severe mental illnesses in prison. If they had different exposure, would they be in prison? So now we can look at it from a preventative standpoint when we get to the children when they're in elementary school to make sure that they have the right supports in place to prevent them from becoming incarcerated. Anybody have any questions, feedback, comments, concerns? Go ahead, Savannah.
I did some research. It was very limited. But I'm curious about if you have any thoughts on it. It was on the effects of ACEs and how that related to the incarcerated population. And I found a lot of links to that. So people who had adverse childhood experiences were more likely to be incarcerated. Does IDD, is that within ACEs? Is that at all related in any type of way?
I haven't seen it actually directly connected to
Okay.
ACEs, but the impacts of IDD are within ACEs. So the bullying, the abuse.
Got it.
People with IDD are 90% more likely to be physically and sexually abused than their non-disabled peers.
Okay.
So if you think about it that way, then yes, we've had clients that were actual human trafficking victims. And we also know just from one of the Diddy trial, all these things that when you are groomed, you become loyal to your captor. And it's the same way with them, but it's different. We have a client in Autumn. I use this story in my training. He was abused from the age of 6 to 12 by his caregiver, forced to dress in women's clothing, was forced to stay in a closet, literally live in a closet from that age. And then he sodomized someone at 14 and was incarcerated. But he had IDD. He's still with us. He's doing very well. He's doing very, very well. He's 38 now, but his abuse will line up with the ACEs. Should they
Okay.
add disability to ACEs? Absolutely.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
should. But that is why we are here, so we can advocate for bigger and better resources and conversations. Go ahead, Autumn. Thank you, Savannah.
It's okay. Ariel can go.
Oh, Ariel, go ahead.
Okay. I run into this a lot, like culturally, just parents not wanting their kid to have a disability.
Yes.
Like, and then like and then there's also the acceptable ones and the unacceptable ones.
Mhm.
Right. So it's acceptable for my kid to have ADHD. It is not acceptable for my kid to have any kind of severe disability.
Yes.
Anything beyond that, right? So I guess like my question would be like how do you work with families and even getting them to get to the point of being willing to test their kids? I've even worked with high schoolers who are about to be 18, right? They're and they should, and like what you said, like getting tested before the age of 22 is like super important. I work with young adults and families will discourage them from getting any kind of testing because they will then say, well, if people think something's wrong with you, now you can't get a job or you can't do X, Y, Z, right? So I guess my question is like, what is your approach to convincing families?
Very carefully. It is very acceptable to have a severe mental illness because that is curable. IDD is lifelong. IDD is something that you do not grow out of. It is literally how your brain developed. And how your brain develops is how it stays. And people, like you said, it's acceptable to have ADHD because I can give him a pill and he'll sit down and he'll do this. The older population of IDD, they are heavily medicated to the point where they have, by the time they turn 60, they are starting to decline drastically because of the medication. pass away from liver toxicity, pass away from kidney failure, pass away from just bad hearts from having to flush all those meds out, heavily, heavily medicated, because it's easier to give a med than it is to do habilitation versus rehabilitation. So to convince parents, it is definitely a labor of love, and it is painstaking, and it is something that education, organizations like yours, organizations like mine, advocates like Mrs. Murdoch, where we all have to get together and just shout from the rooftops, like, this is a real thing. There are services available. There are resources, because the likelihood of your child, especially if they're from a low economic status, of getting arrested is higher. So how can we prevent this from happening? Go ahead, Autumn.
Is another part of the idea not relying so heavily on medication, so providing them with the support they need so they don't need that much medication, but still providing them with it, just not enough where they begin to decline because of the body's impact? Or
We're moving more towards that. So one of the things that
Okay.
Maryland does, they have an eligibility process, which is difficult. I'm not sure. I didn't have a chance to research Delaware's, because I know you guys do a lot of work in that, in the carceral system space. But these are things that are available in all states. I just didn't get a chance to research it completely. But if you look up the 1915 I home and community-based waiver, that is through medical assistance, Medicaid. If they meet the qualifications, they are able to get these services, which helps mitigate the need for medication. Because we're not just treating their severe mental illness, we're actually working with them to be, actually giving them the support. So they have community living group home services, employment services, which means you can get a job. I don't know why people think they can't work, but they can get a job. They work very well. Meaningful day services, so someplace for them to go during the day so they can socialize, they can learn skills, they can learn how to do laundry, they can learn how to money management, training and educational services, personal support. So that is where someone comes in the home and works with them in their parents' home or their personal home. Behavioral support services, that's along the lines of what you're talking about, Autumn. This is a support where it's similar to a behavior implementation plan, if you're familiar with ABA, but they teach them certain skills on how to not just deal with aggressive behaviors, even though that's what it's been historically, but how to communicate more effectively, how to use an assistive technology device, how to cross the street with support, how to, anything that's a behavior, anything that's measurable and observable, how can we improve your behavior so you can communicate better with people? So that's along the lines of what you're talking about, because the medicine really is to deal with the co-occurring severe mental illness, if that exists. But historically, because of the maladaptive behaviors, they will put them on medication to sedate them. It's easier to deal with a calm person than it is to deal with someone who wants to advocate for themselves, but lacks the language to, and lacks the conceptual ability to. And that is it. I wanted to go way more in detail about things, but I'm very, 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 very cognizant of time and not misusing people's time. So is anybody have any questions, comments? We have about 2 minutes left, so please feel free to just chime in, jump in. I'm going to stop the recording now.